Good morning. Thank you for attending this presentation. And I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Beryl Cohen, the Executive Director of NASW in Shepherd. And let's give her a big applause.
Thank you. So I'm sure, does that work? Everybody can hear me? All right. I'm also at the end of bronchitis, so I promise I'm not contagious. I just have coughing fits every once in a while. Which is why I'm sucking on a cough drop, which we're not supposed to do when you present. But if I don't, this will all go downhill really fast. So spare me. And I also do promise that I'm not contagious. And I sound much better than I do. So, my name is Beryl Cohen, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Social Workers Indiana Chapter. Come mid-April, it will be 8 years that I've been Executive Director of the association. And so today, I'm going to talk just a little bit about, I'll give you just a brief summary of who I am and kind of how I got here. But we'll talk just a little bit about NASW and who we are. And about the profession and about licensing, because they're all interconnected, all of the pieces. Summer and Quentin do have a copy of this. I got really sick, and I did not get in my handouts until Wednesday this week. So if you want it, I promise that you can get a copy of it. I promise. It's one of those things, you know, sometimes you just have to roll with things, and that's what I'm trying to do. So, just a little bit about who I am. So I have been a member of NASW since the early 90s when I was in graduate school. I joined because a faculty said to me, it's the right thing to do, you're supposed to support your profession. I have been a member since 1992, continuously, because I believe in what we do. And also because NASW is why I am where I am today. And I don't just mean like because I'm the executive director of the association, but a lot of the connections I've made throughout my life and throughout my career have been through NASW, because most of my jobs were policy jobs where I was the only social worker. And so NASW was always a place where I could hang out with other social workers, and we haven't figured it out yet. We all talk kind of a different language than the rest of the world, does that make sense? And so it it feels very nice lots of times to be amongst other social workers. And so that's kind of how it's worked for me. I've been a registered lobbyist in the state of Indiana for well over 15 years. I knew that was like, I'm in denial of my age. But I've worked on behalf of low-income families. I worked for Prevent Child Abuse. I ran a project on poverty and welfare for about 5.5 years in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then I got hired by the Obama administration to actually run all the state's poverty programs. And so what Lottie was saying earlier about we are everywhere, we are everywhere. And it's the one thing that I've always felt it's a disservice to the profession, is that we don't claim our education. So I know lots of people who are like, oh, well, I'm a policy analyst. Okay, but you're also a social worker. So claim that piece of knowledge, because that we are everywhere. If we don't let people, and remind them that we are, it doesn't work well. When I got done I got fired by the Daniels administration, because that's what happens when new administrations come in. And then I decided, I went out and did about 10 years of contract work, just decided that I needed to walk away for a little while. And then the first Trump administration started, and I realized that it was time for me to step back in and start trying to have an impact again. And so here I am, almost 8 years later, with another Trump administration. And now I'm not going to get political, because we don't all have to agree on everything, but as social workers, we have to agree that the code of ethics professionally is what directs what we do. Right? You all can believe whatever you want to believe personally. I cannot change that. Nobody can change that. but as a professional, you want to make sure you have those. So NASW, we've been around since 1955. We currently have 55 chapters. NASW Indiana is a medium chapter. And our work really is around enhancing professional growth and development of our members, as well as creating and maintaining professional standards, which is a lot of what I do, is helping people understand what we do as social workers, why we have the requirements we have, and why we shouldn't just let anybody call themselves, right? Just because you have a high school diploma and you want to do case management, then you can call yourself a case manager, but unless you have the VSW or the MSW, you can't call it. So, we are your membership association. We represent social workers, whether they're members or not. So if you're a member, you get an opportunity to have a say in things. If you're not a member, you don't get the same opportunities. We are in Indiana. We have about 1,650 members. We do a lot of work around public policy. We also do programming. We currently have 7 regions. And our board is made up of representatives from each region, as well as we have both a VSW and an MSW student rep. And then we have a number of committees that if you're a member, you're welcome to be part of and help in planning and activities. And just, so this is my last of my sales pitch, I promise. This is the last piece. But really and truly, NASW can benefit you throughout your career. John Paulson and I know him because a lot before I became executive director, I ran our political action committee. Right? John was on the board. That's how we met, I think, the very first time. Was at a board meeting. That's how you meet people. That's how you can connect people. And we now have a couple of different national, international communities online that you can actually connect with people all over the country who are NASW members. So if you decide you want to move, you have a family member who's moving, you have a friend who's moving, there are ways to be able to connect with people all over the country and in fact all over the world because we have members everywhere.
I joined in '99.
I didn't realize that, no. I didn't realize I was that much older than you, but that's okay. So, membership, for those of you who are students, it's $60. If you're not, these are our other membership rates. And membership it's 12 months from whenever you join for 12 months. So it's not like only for 2025, right, or whatever. It runs actually the actual date for 12 months from when you join. Somebody always asks that. Yes?
So one of the things for me, I teach at the AS level at Vincent University, and I would like to talk to you about that afterwards.
We do have associate level. We do have associate membership.
Great.
So, yeah,
Excellent.
we do, and it's the same structure.
Okay.
And the only difference between associate and besides the degree difference,
Right. Yes.
But as far as membership goes,
Right. Mm-hmm.
there's really no difference.
Awesome.
I think the only difference is that associate members maybe can't vote in certain things, but that's a small part. They can still be active in all of the committees and all of that other stuff, and you get access to all the same information.
Awesome.
So yeah, we can, and I have some other options too. So yes, find me after this.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
So I just want to, again, part of this is that I want to make sure that you all remember that we are everywhere. And this is Social Work Month, and I think it's really important to remember that we do all kinds of things, from advocacy and organizing to working. I mean, there are social workers who work for members of Congress, right, who work in constituent services. We currently have a licensed clinical social worker who is a state representative from, I believe she's from Marion, Indiana. I'm going to mangle that, so we're not even going to claim. She's a little north of Indianapolis is where she's from. But we do all kinds of things. And so it's really important to remember that we can do all kinds of things and we've helped support all kinds of changes in the world. And while I don't think any of us would ever say that any profession is perfect, I will not say that social work is perfect. We've had some we've had issues, right? I mean, everybody does. But we are where we are today because of the things that we've done. And all we need, and what's really important at this point is to continue to work and move forward and try and continue to make, yes, my rose-colored glasses are on, make the world a better place so that everybody, it really is for everybody. And not just for a group or to disinclude somebody. We are the largest group of licensed mental health professionals in the country. We are also the largest group of licensed mental health professionals in the state of Indiana. There are over 12,000 licensed social workers in the state. Oops. And just because it's Social Work Month, I have to throw in my favorite. If anybody, you guys know who Frances Perkins is? I hope somebody knows. If you don't know who Frances Perkins is, John, you guys need to teach this better. Frances Perkins, she's a social worker. She was the first woman who served as the Secretary of Labor under FDR. She helped create the minimum wage. She helped create child labor laws. She helped lay the groundwork for the Social Security Act and for what we currently have today as the safety net programs. All in by somebody who was born in the late 1800s. And so the fact that during the early 1900s, the 1920s, 30s, 40s, that she was able to accomplish what she did. So in your spare time, because I know everybody's got a lot of it, but if you have an opportunity, I would really encourage you to read some about her, because it's Women's History Month and it's Social Work Month, and she is a pioneer of what has gotten us to where we are. This book is very thick and meaty. I will warn you all. It's good. I've read it, I think, 3 times now. It's an amazing book. So, why you all came, which was to talk about licensing, but all of those things have a purpose, because in order to call yourself a social worker in the state of Indiana, you have to have a license. Agree, disagree, like it, don't like it, that is the way the law was written when we wrote it back in the early 90s, when we started working on it. Licensing took a long time to get in Indiana. We were one of the first mental health professions to get a license in the state. And it is all, whether you like it or not, it is all, NASW was a large part of getting that to happen. Not me, I was just graduating when the first licenses started in the state. But it is really important, and licensing gets us title protection. It also helps people see us as professionals, right? So, none of you probably remember this because you all are too young, but there was a time when anybody could call themselves a social worker. You could be a high school dropout, decide you want to do therapy, and call yourself a social worker and hang up a shingle outside your door and put an ad in the newspaper, and put an ad in the yellow pages, right? And you could do it. And licensing was the step to try and make sure that only people who are actually trained and have the education are actually providing those services, which protects the profession, it protects all of us and all of you, and it protects the clients that we serve in our communities. Because without that license, the only thing you can do is sue somebody. So if somebody is doing something, and today, to this day, if somebody decides they want to call themselves a social worker, they can. If they get caught, they end up getting not so nice letters about having that they need to be licensed, right? And if they refuse, then they can actually, there's a long process that happens, but there are ramifications for doing that and not following the rules. And so it really does provide a way for us to make sure and hold each other accountable, but also for our communities to hold us accountable and make sure that we're providing good quality services. In Indiana, we have a combined licensing board, and their job is to establish the rules and regulations of the profession. So statute and what the General Assembly does gets put into statute and becomes law. And then the licensing board then creates rules that then implement those laws. And so it's a 2-step process, and that's the same for any law that happens. So they get to set the requirements around continuing education, what counts as continuing education, how many you need. And they're also the body that would investigate a complaint. So if you know somebody who's a licensed mental health professional, so licensed social worker, marriage and family therapist, addictions, or mental health counselor, you could file a complaint with the Attorney General's office. They would then have a special division that only works on these licenses. They would then do an investigation, and if there are grounds, they would take that back to the licensing board, and the licensing board would do an administrative hearing. And when you get to administrative hearings, it's all public, and depending on the month, it can also be streamed out to the world. So, because a lot of them are virtual. Did you know that they're now like almost monthly? Most of them, I shouldn't say every single one. Most of them are virtual now. Yeah. I need to get that list out to all the faculty and tell you guys about this. You can do it. So if you ever have a spare Monday, fourth Monday of the month, you can go and listen to the board. It is fascinating. I know you're all like, that wouldn't be fun. But it really is fascinating to listen to some of the discussions and things. So when you think about licensing in Indiana, we have 3 levels. So we have an LBSW, an LSW, and an LCSW. There are a handful of exemptions that are really just for the LBSW. Excuse me, there's a very small exemption for somebody with an MSW, but it's very limited. So, if you're gonna graduate and you're gonna go work for the state of Indiana, you don't have to be licensed. I would encourage you to still be licensed because you will likely not want to work for the state of Indiana for your whole career. You might. I'm a person who's changed jobs like every 5 to 7 years, so the idea of being someplace for 25 years is just, I can't even imagine that. So from that perspective, think about what you might want to do in the future, and I would encourage you. So I am an unlicensed social worker. I graduated right when licensing started, and I left the state. And when I came back, I have done nothing but policy jobs which don't require a license. I also have horrible test anxiety, always have. I probably should never admit some of this stuff, but anyways, I do. And I think about it, and I'm getting closer. I can actually, like when I first started this job, I could barely talk about licensing without having like little mini anxiety attacks happening. You know, like that pit of your stomach kind of thing. Yeah. And now I can talk about it, and so I think I'm getting closer and closer to being able to go and sit for my LSW. But think about it, I graduated in '93. That's a long time ago. Lots has changed. Don't be needy. If you guys are graduating soon, or you just graduated and you haven't get your license, just do it. Just do it as soon as you can and move on with life. I promise. So licensing oversight in Indiana is through the Behavioral Health and Human Services Licensing Board. They, again, cover all 4 professions. The board is made up of 2 members from each of the groups, plus there's a psychiatrist on the board, and there's a consumer on the board. It's just the way it's balanced out. There is that is very similar to almost every other board in the state as far as licensing goes. So you always have people who are licensed professionals as well as somebody who uses those services on the boards. That's the long website to get to the Behavioral Health Board. But if you type in social work licensing in Indiana, don't hit NASW's link. The other link that will show up is the Behavioral Health Board. And you can find everything you need to know. When you think about licensing, it's all online. So this is what their website looks like. You click on the application instructions and requirements tab, and it will take you to a list of every single license that they have. And then you can click on whichever one you want, and it will actually get you a detailed list of everything that you need to do and all the hyperlinks. So there is a hyperlink to the criminal background check. Please don't call my office or call the board and say, what am I supposed to do about my criminal background check? Click there and read the instructions. I know you guys chuckled about that. But I have people who call me and they're like, what do I need to do next? I'm like, did you actually read the instructions? Because everything that you need is here. And while it might be buried a little bit, it's much better than it used to be as a website. And everything that you need is here. The really important thing to remember, currently for MSWs, hopefully by July 1, we'll include BSWs. Last year, there was a bill, Representative Lori Gus-Reeves, who's an LCSW, authored a bill that would allow for MSW students to take their test for licensing prior to graduation. At which point, the other three professions all wanted to be on the bill, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that happened, and I missed that we left BSWs out because I was working really hard to make sure that nobody did anything that we didn't want them to do, because usually things can happen really fast at the State House and they can do things that we don't want without us realizing it. So you gotta be really careful. So there is a letter of good standing. So if you're in the last semester of your program, you get a letter of good standing from your faculty. The school has to provide, the program has to provide a letter to the licensing board and say that you are due to graduate in May. You can complete your application and get approval to sit for your exam prior to graduation. If you do that, once you graduate, then you just have to wait the usually 3-ish weeks for your transcripts to become available that show that you graduated and have your degree. They will then send that to the board, and as soon as they get that, you would have your license. If you don't take your test before graduation and you wait until after graduation to submit your application, you cannot complete that application until you have your transcripts. So if you graduate on May 1st and your transcripts takes 3.5 weeks for it to show that you have your degree, and that's a school thing, and we don't have any control over that, right? Schools, it usually takes about 3 weeks to happen. You would not be able to finish your actual application until almost the end of May. At which point then it has to be reviewed and approved. And then you could get the ability to take a test in, say, mid-June. So if you want to, it's easier, but you don't have to. I think that it's probably 50-50 of, is it better to take it while you're in school? Do you have time to take it while you're, there's all those things to think about. But it's an opportunity, and it's not a bad opportunity. So that's information, and again, it's supposed, the language for the BSW should be amended into a bill next week, and then that will be effective. Yes, John?
So just to kind of make sure it's added up right, so that now with the new legislation at the master's level, they can not only start the application in the last semester, they have to get that letter from like us, but then if that all goes through, they can take the LSW exam before each graduate. But if they wait, then they have to wait to apply until we get off our lazy rears and get a degree.
Right.
Okay, so my other question is, so that when they do that, when they apply for the LSW during that last semester, can they also go ahead and apply for the temp license?
Nope. So this is, I'll get there. Let me say that I'll get there, let me go through. So the advantage of taking your test and doing your application prior to graduation is that then once your diploma is conferred, and you pass the test, you will have your license. You don't need a temporary. If you take your test prior to graduation and you fail, you would then have to wait until your transcripts are available to get your temporary permit, because you cannot have a temporary permit, you cannot work in the state until you actually have that conferred degree. So that is kind of the line that has to happen, the steps. And this just went into effect July 1, so we're all still trying to figure out how best to explain this to people so it makes the most sense and doesn't confuse the world, because it is a little confusing. I'll be the first to say it can be a little confusing to think about. But there are a number of states that allow students to test before they graduate. We can't find anything that shows that you do better or worse or anything else. It's really just a decision that you all have to make. But from the bottom of my heart, I am sorry that we forgot BSWs, but sometimes things happen really fast in a short session, and I was just happy we got through. And nothing bad happened with it, because there's always that chance. So once you're ready to submit your application, right? So you all, if you're graduating in May, you can start your application in April. Whether you want to test early or not, you could start your application. You can start your application today. You just need to remember that everything has to happen in an order, and that until that transcript actually shows that you graduated, you cannot complete the application. It's never completed. That's the last thing. And since none of us have any control over when the bursar's office releases your transcripts, that is something. But let me just say one other thing, which is please be really careful, because if you have any kind of fine on your account, the school can refuse to confer your diploma. I'm not talking about that if you owe money, like, right, that you still owe money on your degree, but if you had a parking ticket, there we go. I usually say the library fund, but you guys don't check things out from the library anymore. It's all electronic. So anyway, but they give you a bunch of parking fines. They could say that they're not going to release your final transcript. So just keep an eye on that. Again, there's nothing any of us can do about that. That's different schools have rules around not. And when I was in school a long time ago, it usually ended up being lost. Books that you checked out of the library and then lost, and then you had to pay for them before they would let you get your diploma. It always seemed kind of weird. But anyways, so once you've got all that and you're ready, there is a box that you can click on the website where you actually apply to, you either are applying or renewing for your license. And that then takes you back to the main page of the professional licensing agency. And it is a system that every single license application for any license in the state all goes through the same system. So you have to set up an account. If you don't have an account, you'll have to create an account. If you have any problems with that, there is contact information about who to contact. But you can go in and you create your account, do all your applications online, upload all of your documents. If you have it, upload it. Do not mail it to the licensing board. Do not email it unless you absolutely have to. Because if you email or mail documents in, what has to happen to that? Somebody has to open it. If it's a hard mail, they have to actually scan it. Then they have to find the scan and attach the scan to your account. So it's going to take more time, right? There is a way where you go into the university and tell the university to send your transcripts and you don't have to touch it. But there are other things that you might need to upload. If you can, just do that. It'll go faster, nothing will get lost. And let me just say that, please remember, we all make mistakes. And all it takes is somebody saying that, misspelling my name, right? And now one document is not going to match to another place because my name got misspelled because somebody has a typo. So sometimes mistakes happen that slow things down. They are not typically purposeful, so just remember we're all human and be kind when you call. I'm not saying you can't call and complain if there's a problem. You should call the licensing board and see what's going on. But just remember that we are all trying to do the best jobs that we can. Nobody's purposely trying to lose your stuff. It may feel that way sometimes, but that's not really what's going on. But once you set up your account, then you can go back in and you can track everything for your application, right? If they say it's going to take about 3 to 4 weeks, don't start calling them 3 days after you've completed the application, asking them what's going on. right? Because they're not gonna have an answer for you. If they tell you it's gonna take 3 weeks, please give them those 3 weeks before you start checking or before you start calling. And again, everything, you should be able to access every bit of information on there. Also, please don't call my office and ask me about the status of your application for your license, because NASW has absolutely no ability to get into anything on the state side to see what the status of your application is. I can go in, we can all go in and check somebody's license, but I cannot, I have no ability. I'm happy to try and help if there's a problem, but please don't call and yell at me when I tell you I can't see your application, because I don't work for the state and I can't see your application. And there are people who call and yell at me about why I can't do that. So remember, be nice. I probably didn't have to say any of that to any of you, because you all look like very nice people. So one of the things to think about when you're filling out your application is there is a set of questions that you have to answer. All right? And I'm not sure if this is super clear, but what's really important is if you answer any of these questions wrong, you have now lied on a formal official document that you are signing and attesting that it is accurate. Okay, I know I made that sound very dramatic, but there's a reason for that, because I need you all to make sure that you read the instructions really carefully when you're answering the questions. I am not accusing anybody in this room of having done anything, but like the question where the arrow is, it says, except for minor violations of traffic laws resulting in fines and arrests or convictions that have been expunged by a court, have you ever been arrested? And if the answer is yes, you need to check yes. Even if you were 17 and it got moved into adult court, or what, like, just say yes. Even if you have passed a DCS background check, stuff will show up on the background check that they do for your license that will not show up on other background checks. And the question is, have you ever been arrested? No. You have to say. That was good timing. I had to plan that out. The reason I say that is because if you say no and you were arrested, when your background check comes back, it's going to show that you lied on a legal binding document. At which point you were going to have to explain what happened. And you might actually be called and asked to come in and explain publicly to the board why you did, what happened and why you did. And there are people who've shown up. I've been sitting in board meetings, licensing board meetings for almost 8 years now. There are people who will show up and be like, well, yeah, I had an issue with drugs and alcohol, but I don't like talking about that. That was a long time ago. I don't want to talk about that. So I just didn't answer it. And I hope you all get that that's not a good answer. And the answer, and it doesn't have to be like, we all make mistakes. We all make some bad decisions, okay? Maybe I won't say we all. Like we do. We all make bad decisions sometimes, especially if we're young. Because you say yes, because you were arrested, because you got convicted of something, doesn't mean that you will not be able to get a license. But it does mean that you need to be able to say and do what needs to happen. So if you answer yes to any of these questions, you have to explain what happened. It does not have to be a 75-page document, right? But it does need to show what happened and that you took ownership of what happened. I have seen people in front of the board explaining about their attempted murder charges that they served time for. Like, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to never get a license. It just means that you have to be honest. And the board's job is to work to make sure that people who get licenses are prepared. So if you have an addiction And if you haven't addressed that addiction well, should we actually be giving you a license to go work with people? Probably not. We should probably make sure that you are okay, right? And safe in your own recovery and everything else before we, and no, there's never a guarantee. Things happen, right? We all know that. But the board's job is really to make sure that you are at the best place to get your license and that we're not setting you up to have something bad happen. Because that's not okay for any of us to. Again, this would be something that you could write out and upload. There have been moments where things have been expunged and they still will show up. And if that's the case, then you just have to be able to provide proof to the board that it was expunged. Because again, sometimes computer systems don't always talk to each other well, and so there are mistakes that happen. Again, I have never seen anybody completely denied a license because of something that happened. There have been applications and licenses that end up maybe put on probation for a little while. But, and that's just my experience, so again, it's possible it happened and I just wasn't there. Just be honest, that's all. And read the instructions really carefully. Because lots of people will say, well, I read that and I just thought it was because I was convicted, but I was arrested, but I wasn't convicted, so I didn't have to do it. And it's like, no, that's not what the question says. So read them a couple of times to make sure that you're accurate. So when you're ready to do your license, again, you submit, you access the correct level, so LBSW, LSW, or LCSW. If you're going for your clinical level license and you don't have all of your hours done, all of my hours will be done by next week, so I'm gonna complete my application today. Nope. Actually make sure that all of your hours are done before you submit that application, right? Don't, like you can start them early, but don't hit the submit button until you know that everything is going to go well. Make sure if you get your LSW, right? You get your temporary permit or you get your LSW, make sure that you go in and look at the LCSW application if you someday want to get your clinical license and look at what you need to have to be able to submit that application. What information do you need about your supervisors? What information do they need to fill out? How are you going to keep track of that? What happens if you change jobs? What happens if your supervisor leaves the state? How are you going to have proof of all that stuff? So make sure that you don't wait until you're ready to submit your application for your LCSW 2-3 years in and be like, wait a minute, what happened to that? I can't find. I know that John was my supervisor, but I can't find John. And like, those are hours that are be lost if you can't find them. So make sure that you track what you need to track. Again, you will need your official transcripts. You'll need the complete criminal history check, no matter, even if you did your LSW and 3 years later go in and submit for your LCSW, you will need to do another criminal background check. It's just part of the process. There's a $50 fee for the application for your license. There's a $25 fee you can pay to get a temporary permit. You don't have to get a temporary permit, but if you want to work in the state, you have to have either a temporary permit or a full license. Unless you're an intern, that is the only option. Please do not believe any employer that says to you, we don't care if you are licensed. They may not care if you are licensed, but they will not get in trouble, you will get in trouble. You will end up in front of the board if you don't have a license and are found working. Bless you. We do have permits, so the LSW and LBSW have 12-month permits. There is one permit. Do not graduate in May, submit your application, get your temporary permit, right? And then wait until like March of 2026 to take your test. Because if for some reason you don't pass, we have a really good pass rate in the state. But if for some reason you don't pass, you have to wait 90 days before you can retake the test. And that is a decision that is set up for the people who do the testing, not us. You have to wait 90 days. If you fail a test in March, your temporary permit is going to expire in May of 2026. Once it's expired, you cannot work as a social worker in the state of Indiana. Don't do it. Do it. Get your temporary permit, start working, take your test as quickly as you can. just do it fast. It'll be a lot less painful, I promise. And whatever you do, don't wait 30 plus years to do anything, because that's not good for any of us. There aren't that many jobs that you can do like mine where you don't need a license. So once you submit everything, you'll get an email from the board saying that your application has been approved, and there'll be a number, and that number then you have to go to ASWB's website to actually submit and pay to take the exam. If you need an accommodation, you need to make sure you put it on your application here. You also need to make sure you put it on your application to ASWB. And when you call to schedule your exam, you need to make sure that you make that request very clear. Do not, if you need, this actually has happened. There was somebody whose approved accommodation request was to have a separate room to be able to take the test in. They didn't tell the testing site that they chose about their accommodation. And so the day they showed up to take the test, there was already somebody in that single room. They were out of luck. They lost the application that they paid. They had to repay for another test, and they had to set the date. And they were very upset and blamed the testing site, but the testing site didn't even know there was an accommodation, right? So you can go to any testing site, the one that's